Warning, this video contains mature themes, disturbing content, and references to unexplained events. Viewer discretion is advised. Kenneth Anderson and the Shadows of the Jungle. The jungles of southern India are not just wild expanses. They are realms steeped in mystery, alive with whispers and shadows. Beneath their dense canopy, danger prowls, and secrets linger, unseen yet always present. Time here flows differently, marked not by minutes, but by the echo of distant roars, the rustle of unseen creatures, and the eerie silence that tightens the chest like a predator's. For Kenneth Anderson, these jungles were more than his hunting grounds. They were a lifelong obsession. He ventured into these untamed forests with a rifle in hand and an unyielding spirit, a man who knew that every step could be his last. The jungle was his stage, where life and death played out in raw, unfiltered drama. But it wasn't just man-eating predators he faced. In the thick of the wilderness, he encountered forces that defied explanation, shadows that moved without form, dreams that warned of danger, and whispers that spoke of spirits haunting the trees. Anderson's stories were never just about survival, they were about confronting the unknown. In these moments, where logic faltered and mystery took over, he became a part of the jungle's own legend, a man destined to walk the fine line between reality and the supernatural. Welcome to Storyteller Pro, where we bring to life the most gripping, spine-tingling tales of adventure, survival, and the unexplainable. In this episode, we step into the untamed world of Kenneth Anderson, a man whose name became synonymous with courage, mystery, and the relentless pursuit of understanding the jungle's secrets. Introduction to this story. This is more than a tale of survival. It's a journey into the heart of mystery itself. The story begins in Sigor, a remote village at the edge of the Blue Mountains, where the air hangs heavy with fear. A man-eating tiger has claimed its territory, a beast so intelligent and elusive that the villagers believe it to be something more, a spirit of vengeance stalking its prey. Kenneth Anderson arrives, determined to confront the beast. Armed with his rifle and a lifetime of experience, he steps into the jungle, where every shadow seems to watch, every whisper seems to warn, and every dream carries a message he cannot ignore. But the jungle has rules of its own, and Anderson will soon learn that the greatest dangers are not always those you can see. This is Kenneth Anderson and the Shadows of the Jungle, a tale where courage meets mystery and the hunter must face not only the predator but the unknown. Welcome to Storyteller Pro, where legends come alive. The blacksmith's warning. It was dusk when Kenneth Anderson arrived in Sigor, the sky painted in hues of amber and violet as the sun dipped behind the Blue Mountains. The air was thick with the scent of earth, sweat, and fear, a palpable tension that seemed to press down on the small village like an unseen hand. Chickens clucked nervously in their coops, dogs growled at shadows, and the faint cries of children drifted through the air. The village was alive, yet it felt unnaturally still, as though the jungle itself were holding its breath. As Kenneth stepped off the dirt path into the village square, his boots heavy with the mud of the forest trails, he noticed the silence. Conversations between the villagers hushed as they saw him approach, their eyes darting toward the tree line as though expecting the man-eater to emerge at any moment. A woman gathered her children close, muttering prayers under her breath. A group of men stood by the well, their shoulders hunched, their voices low. Whispers carried fragments of words. Spirit, tiger, hunter. Kenneth scanned the square with practiced ease, his rifle slung across his shoulder. The weight of it was a comfort, but not a reassurance. Even with all his experience, He knew the jungle was unpredictable. It had a way of turning hunters into prey when least expected. He made his way toward the village elder's hut, the faint glow of a fire visible through the bamboo walls. As he passed the blacksmith's forge, the rhythmic clang of a hammer striking iron cut through the silence. Sparks danced in the dim light as the blacksmith worked, his silhouette framed against the glow of the embers. Kenneth might have walked past without a second glance, had the old man not spoken.
"Hunter,"
came the voice, low and gravelly, carrying the weight of something far heavier than his years. Kenneth stopped, turning toward the sound. The blacksmith was hunched over the anvil, his face lined like the bark of an ancient tree. His hands, calloused and strong, pause mid-strike. He looked up, and his eyes, dark, intense, and strangely hollow, met Kenneth's.
"Don't go into the jungle tonight,"
the blacksmith said, his tone so deliberate that it froze Kenneth in place for a moment. Kenneth tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips.
"And why not?"
he asked, his voice light, almost teasing. He had heard warnings like this before, from villagers whose lives were steeped in superstition and fear. They always carried tales of spirits and curses, of animals possessed by wrathful gods or betrayed ancestors. The blacksmith straightened, setting his hammer aside. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate and heavy, as if he carried more than just his tools.
"I saw it.
He said, his voice dropping lower, almost to a whisper.
In my dreams, a tiger shadow swallowing yours."
Kenneth raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. He had learned not to dismiss local beliefs entirely. Fear often sharpened the senses in ways that logic could not. Still, he couldn't help the skepticism that colored his words.
"A shadow swallowing mine?"
he asked, folding his arms.
"That's quite a vivid dream."
The blacksmith didn't flinch. His eyes, distant yet piercing, seemed to look past Kenneth, as if he was staring at something only he could see.
"The jungle will not forgive your steps tonight,"
he said, his voice like the rumble of distant thunder.
"The tiger waits for you, and something more waits beyond it."
Kenneth felt a shiver trace his spine, unbidden and unwelcome. He was not a man easily unnerved, but there was something in the blacksmith's tone, something unyielding and ancient, that unsettled him. He forced a chuckle, though it sounded hollow even to his ears.
"I appreciate your concern, old man, but I've been through enough jungles to know my way around."
The blacksmith's hand shot out, gripping Kenneth's wrist with surprising strength. His fingers were rough and warm, like the iron he shaped, and his grip was unrelenting.
"Mark my words, Hunter,"
he said, his voice trembling with urgency.
"The jungle does not play fair. Tonight, it will take more than your skill. Listen to it, or you'll never leave."
Kenneth stared at the old man, his skepticism wavering for a moment as he saw the raw intensity in his eyes. This wasn't mere superstition. It was something else, something deeper. The blacksmith released his grip and stepped back, his gaze never leaving Kenneth.
"Perhaps,"
Kenneth said, finally, his voice quieter than before. He nodded respectfully and continued toward the elder's hut, but the weight of the blacksmith's words stayed with him, pressing against his thoughts like the humid air of the jungle. The stone-vomiting girl. The village of Sigur had sunk into uneasy quiet by nightfall, its residents retreating to their homes, the glow of oil lamps flickering faintly behind bamboo walls. The jungle encroached on all sides, its whispers carried on the cool night breeze, laced with the occasional call of an unseen predator. But tonight, even the usual jungle sounds seemed subdued, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. Kenneth Anderson stood at the edge of the village, his rifle resting against his shoulder, when a commotion stirred near a small hut on the outskirts. Murmurs turned to gasps, and gasps gave way to cries of alarm. He moved toward the noise, curiosity mingling with unease. Inside the hut, a young girl, barely 13, sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a ring of nervous villagers. The air was stifling, the mingled smell of sweat, incense, and damp earth hanging heavy. The girl's pale face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with terror, as though she had seen something that defied understanding. Her lips trembled, parting slightly, as if on the verge of a scream. Kenneth stepped closer, his broad frame casting a shadow over the huddled crowd. He scanned the scene with the practiced calm of a man who had seen fear in all its forms. Yet there was something different here. Something primal, unnameable. The girl's eyes flicked toward him, and for a moment he felt a chill creep up his spine. Her small frame shuddered as if seized by an invisible force. Her head snapped back, her fingers clawing at the air. The room seemed to darken, the oil lamps flickering wildly, their flames dancing as though caught in a sudden gust. And then, with a guttural gasp, the girl opened her mouth wide. A small stone, smooth and glistening as though polished, crackling onto the dirt floor with an audible thud. The villagers cried out, recoiling in fear.
The spirits speak through her.
An old woman exclaimed, clutching a rosary of wooden beads, her voice trembling with conviction. The crowd murmured prayers under their breath, some bowing their heads, others backing away from the girl as though she were a vessel of something unholy. The girl's trembling hand extended slowly, her fingers pointing directly at Kenneth. Her lips quivered, but her voice, when it came, was steady and chilling.
The tiger has your shadow,
she whispered, her words cutting through the murmurs like the sharp crack of a twig in the jungle. Kenneth froze. For a moment, the weight of her words pressed against him like the humid jungle air, thick and suffocating. He felt the eyes of the villagers on him, their collective fear palpable, almost tangible. The girl's gaze never wavered, her finger still fixed on him, as though she could see something no one else could. This wasn't the first time Kenneth had brushed against the inexplicable. The jungle had its ghosts, its whispers, its shadows. He remembered a night years ago in another village where he had waited in a hunter's bungalow. Outside, footsteps had circled the structure. Slow, deliberate, human. Yet when he opened the door, rifle ready, there was nothing. The footprints he found the next morning circled the bungalow 3 times but led nowhere. The villagers later told him the story of a hunter who had died in that very bungalow, his restless spirit said to wander endlessly, warning others of the dangers lurking in the jungle. And then there was the night he followed a leopard's trail, only to stumble upon a shrine deep in the forest. Lit candles and scattered offerings surrounded a stone idol, its features obscured by moss and age. As he stepped closer, the candles extinguished all at once, plunging the jungle into darkness. He had felt it then, the weight of unseen eyes, the sensation of being watched by something far older than the forest itself. Kenneth shook his head, trying to dispel the weight of the girl's words and the memories they dredged up. Logic was his armor. He told himself it was fear playing tricks on these people, the weight of superstition bending their reality. But even as he turned to leave the hut, the murmurs of the villagers and the unblinking gaze of the girl stayed with him, a shadow of doubt creeping into his otherwise resolute mind. The jungle, he knew, had many faces, some visible, others hidden in the shadows, and tonight the shadows seemed closer than ever. The hunt begins. The morning sun filtered through the misty veil of the jungle, casting long, dappled shadows across the dirt trail as Kenneth Anderson set out. Behind him, the villagers stood in uneasy silence, their hands clasped in gestures of prayer. He could feel their eyes on his back, heavy with hope and fear, as if his departure carried their fragile lives into the heart of the jungle with him. Kenneth adjusted the strap of his rifle and tightened his grip. He had ventured into jungles like this many times before, but this one felt different. The air was charged, dense with a kind of tension he couldn't quite place. He pushed the feeling aside. Superstition, he told himself, just the weight of their fear pressing into his thoughts. Still, as he crossed the threshold where the village ended and the wilderness began, a shiver crawled up his spine, unbidden. The forest teemed with life at first, its rhythms as familiar to Kenneth as his own heartbeat. Birds flitted between the branches, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted greens and browns of the undergrowth. The rustle of leaves announced the passage of a sambar deer, its antlers momentarily visible before it disappeared into the foliage. Overhead, a langur monkey let out a sharp alarm call, freezing Kenneth mid-step. He scanned the area, his fingers brushing the trigger of his rifle. Predators often moved in silence, their presence betrayed only by the cries of prey. But after a few tense moments, nothing emerged from the shadows. He exhaled, relaxing slightly, and continued onward. As the hours passed, the jungle began to change. The lively sounds faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that wrapped around him like a suffocating fog. The rustling leaves ceased, the calls of birds vanished, and even the insects seemed to retreat into the unseen depths of the forest. The only sound was the steady crunch of his boots on the dry forest floor, each step unnervingly loud in the stillness. That night, Kenneth found a solitary forest bungalow, its walls worn and weathered by years of neglect. Ivy crept up its sides and the wooden door groaned on its hinges as he pushed it open. Inside, a single room held a battered table, a cot with frayed edges, and a kerosene lamp that sputtered weakly as he lit it. He checked his rifle once more, setting it within arm's reach before settling into the chair. The jungle outside was pitch black, the moonlight barely piercing the canopy. Kenneth listened to the distant hum of the forest, trying to decipher its patterns. Then, just as he began to relax, he heard it. The sound of footsteps outside his window. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be an animal. He froze, every muscle taut. The footsteps circled the bungalow, the crunch of leaves unnervingly measured, as if whoever, or whatever, it was wanted to be heard. Slowly, Kenneth reached for his rifle, his eyes fixed on the window. He stood and moved silently toward it, pushing it open in one swift motion. The moonlight spilled across the clearing, illuminating the ground below. The trees stood tall and silent, their shadows stretching long and dark, but there was no movement, no sign of anyone or anything. Kenneth scanned the area, his rifle steady, but the jungle remained unnervingly still. He closed the window and returned to his seat, his nerves on edge. And then the footsteps began again, circling, deliberate as before. Kenneth's mind raced. It wasn't an animal. He would have heard the familiar sounds of claws or padded feet. These steps were deliberate, almost human. But no villager would dare come this far into the jungle at night. He stood again, flinging the door open this time, his rifle aimed and ready. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing into his ears like the weight of the jungle itself. He stepped into the clearing, his eyes darting between the trees, the shadows seeming to shift and move at the edge of his vision. The jungle was alive, but with something he couldn't see. Then, just as he was about to retreat inside, he heard a low growl from the darkness, deep, guttural, and impossibly close. He turned toward the sound, his heart pounding as he scanned the shadows. For a moment, he saw it. Two glowing eyes low to the ground, staring back at him. And then they vanished, swallowed by the blackness. Kenneth backed into the bungalow, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. His pulse thundered in his ears as he checked the locks and bolted the shutters. He sat with his rifle pointed at the door, his eyes flicking between the faint glow of the lamp and the shadowed corners of the room. The footsteps didn't return, but the silence outside was worse. It was as if the jungle was waiting, watching, biding its time. Kenneth stayed awake the entire night, the kerosene lamp sputtering its last as the first rays of dawn crept through the cracks in the shutters. The jungle had made its intentions clear. This hunt would not be easy, and it would not be safe. Chilling encounter. The second night descended upon the jungle like a velvet shroud, the air thick and heavy with anticipation. Kenneth Anderson sat perched in the crook of a massive tree, its ancient branches stretching out like skeletal arms above him. Below, a young buffalo calf bleated softly, tied to a stake and oblivious to the danger it faced. The moon hung low and full, its cold light pooling on the forest floor, casting shadows that seemed to shift and dance like living things. Kenneth adjusted his rifle, his senses heightened, every muscle in his body coiled in readiness. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. The cacophony of daytime sounds had long since faded, replaced by a deep, oppressive silence. Even the wind dared not move through the trees. Kenneth scanned the clearing, his sharp eyes combing every shadow, every flicker of movement. He had hunted man-eaters before, but this time felt different. This tiger wasn't just a predator. It was something more, something darker. Then he heard it. A faint crunch of leaves, so soft it could have been the wind. But Kenneth knew better. He froze, every muscle taut, his breath shallow and controlled. The sound came again, deliberate and measured, moving closer. His eyes scanned the underbrush, searching for the source. The tension in the air was electric, each second stretching into an eternity. A shadow shifted at the edge of the clearing. Slowly, deliberately, the tiger emerged. Its body was a ripple of muscle and sinew, moving with a grace that was almost otherworldly. The moonlight caught its orange and black stripes, painting it in stark, vivid contrast against the dark jungle. But it was its eyes that froze Kenneth in place. Glowing not with the reflection of light, but with an unnatural intensity, as if lit from within by some malevolent force. The tiger paused, sniffing the air, its massive head turning toward Kenneth's position in the tree. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, their eyes locked. Kenneth felt something stir within him, a primal fear that gnawed at the edges of his composure. It was a fear he hadn't felt in years, a deep, visceral terror that whispered of death and the unknown. He had faced countless predators, but this was different. This was the abyss, staring back. The tiger crouched low, its muscles coiling like springs. Kenneth knew what was coming. He raised his rifle, his movements deliberate and steady, his breath measured despite the hammering of his heart. He aimed for the shoulder, just as it launched itself forward in a blur of motion. The tiger charged, its roar tearing through the night like thunder. Kenneth fired, the crack of the rifle splitting the air. The bullet struck true, hitting the tiger's shoulder, but it barely faltered. Its jaws gaped wide, teeth glinting like daggers in the moonlight. Kenneth had only a split second to react. He leapt from the tree just as the tiger reached him. He hit the ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in his body, but he didn't stop. Rolling to his feet, he swung his rifle around and fired again. The shot echoed through the clearing, but the tiger was already upon him. The tiger snarled, blood spraying from its wound, but it didn't retreat. Its eyes burned with rage, and its movements were erratic, almost as though it were being driven by something beyond pain or instinct. It swiped at Kenneth with its massive paw, claws slicing through the air with terrifying precision. Kenneth stumbled back, barely avoiding the strike, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He fired again, the shot grazing the tiger's flank. The beast roared, a sound so guttural and feral it sent shivers down Kenneth's spine. It lunged once more, its movements relentless, almost mechanical. Kenneth threw himself to the side, the tiger's claws raking the earth where he had stood moments before. The ground beneath him was slick with its blood, the metallic tang of it filling his nostrils. Finally, the tiger hesitated. Its massive body heaved with labored breaths, its muscles twitching as it struggled to maintain its ferocious momentum. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, It turned and disappeared into the shadows, its glowing eyes lingering for one haunting moment before vanishing completely. Kenneth sank to his knees, his hands trembling as he reloaded his rifle. His breaths came in shallow, uneven bursts as he scanned the clearing, searching for any sign of the tiger's return. The jungle was silent once more, but the silence now carried a weight, a promise. The tiger wasn't done with him. And something about the way it had moved, the way it had stared into his soul, told him that this hunt was far from over. The night pressed on, but Kenneth knew he wouldn't sleep. Not with the knowledge that the jungle had claimed the first move in a deadly game, and it would not be the last. The final confrontation. The morning sun barely pierced the thick canopy of the jungle as Kenneth Anderson followed the faint trail of blood through the undergrowth. The forest was alive with shadows, the air heavy with the pungent scent of iron and decay. Each step was careful, deliberate, his rifle held tightly in his grip. The tiger was close. He could feel it, not just in the tracks and the broken foliage, but in the oppressive weight of the jungle around him, as if the forest itself were mourning the impending end of a predator that had ruled it for so long. The trail led him to a clearing bathed in dappled sunlight, the kind of serene beauty that belied the horrors it concealed. In the center, the tiger lay sprawled, its massive body heaving with each labored breath. Blood matted its fur, staining the ground beneath it. Its eyes, however, were still alive, burning with defiance, rage, and something more, something almost human. Even now it refused to surrender. Kenneth paused at the edge of the clearing, his chest tightening. He had hunted many man-eaters, but there was something about this one, its resilience, its intelligence, its unyielding spirit, that stirred a flicker of respect within him. For a moment he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Compassion for a creature that had fought so fiercely to survive, even as it wrought death in its wake. Kenneth raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. The tiger's gaze locked onto his, unwavering, and for a brief moment he saw something beyond the predator, an echo of life's relentless struggle, of a creature shaped by pain and desperation. He exhaled slowly, steadying his aim. And then from the corner of his eye he saw it. A figure stepping into the clearing, cloaked in the soft glow of moonlight that defied the daylight around them. Kenneth froze. It was the blacksmith. His weathered face calm, his eyes steady as they met Kenneth's. "Shoot for its shadow," the blacksmith said, his voice low but clear, carrying across the clearing as though the jungle itself had fallen silent to listen. Kenneth's grip on the rifle tightened, his mind raced. The blacksmith had died days ago, he knew this, yet here he was, solid and real, standing between Kenneth and the dying tiger. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, the surreal blending with the tangible. He hesitated, his instincts warring with the impossibility of what he was seeing. Here, he knew he was insane deep within him. The tiger let out a low growl, its body shifting slightly, as if mustering the strength for one final act of defiance. Kenneth knew he had seconds, perhaps less. He took a deep breath, trusting the blacksmith's words despite the impossibility of his presence. Shifting his aim, he focused on the tiger's shadow, dark and jagged against the blood-soaked earth. He fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the clearing. The bullet struck true, tearing through the tiger's chest. It let out a final, earth-shaking roar, its massive body shuddering before collapsing into stillness. The jungle fell silent once more, the echoes of the roar fading into the distance. Kenneth lowered his rifle, his breath coming in uneven gasps. The tiger lay motionless, its once burning eyes now dimmed. The weight of the moment settled over him, a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. He had done what he had come to do, but it felt less like a victory and more like the end of something primal, something ancient. He turned to thank the blacksmith, but the clearing was empty. The man was gone as though he had never been there. Kenneth stood in stunned silence, his eyes scanning the tree line, the underbrush, the path he had entered from. There was no sign of him, no footprints, no rustling leaves, just the faint scent of iron and the stillness of the jungle. Kenneth's shoulders sagged, his rifle hanging limply at his side. A part of him had wanted to thank the blacksmith, not just for his guidance, but for his presence. In that moment, the old man had been more than an apparition. He had been a link to something greater, something Kenneth couldn't fully understand. And now, he was gone. As he knelt by the tiger, Kenneth placed a hand on its massive flank, feeling the warmth of its body fading. The jungle had lost one of its fiercest hunters, a creature born of survival and desperation. For all its violence, it had been a force of nature, a testament to the raw, unyielding power of the wild. Kenneth stood, his steps slow as he left the clearing. He felt the absence of the blacksmith like a hollow ache, a sense of having missed something profound, something heroic. The man had been more than a ghost. He had been a guide, a protector, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the jungle, there were forces at work that defied explanation. The jungle stirred around him as he walked, its whispers soft and reverent, as if mourning both the tiger and the blacksmith. Kenneth tightened his grip on his rifle, his thoughts heavy but his steps sure. He had won the hunt, but the victory felt less like triumph and more like closure. A quiet end to a story he could never fully tell. The aftermath. The village erupted in a mixture of cheers and tears as Kenneth Anderson stepped back onto its familiar dirt paths, the weight of his rifle slung across his shoulder. The tiger, the nightmare that had haunted their lives for so long, was no more. The villagers surged forward, their relief palpable, their faces lined with exhaustion and gratitude. Women wept openly, clutching their children tightly, while the men clasped Kenneth's hands in fervent thanks.
You've saved us.
One elder whispered, his voice trembling.
We can finally sleep without fear.
Yet amidst their joy, Kenneth felt a strange hollowness. He nodded politely, offering measured words of comfort, but his thoughts were elsewhere, circling back to the blacksmith. His presence in the clearing had been so real, so vivid. Kenneth's pulse quickened as the memory replayed itself in his mind. The calm voice, the deliberate words, the faint glow of moonlight that had cloaked the man like an otherworldly aura. It wasn't long before he asked the question.
Where is the blacksmith? I owe him my thanks.
The villagers fell silent. The relief on their faces shifted into unease, their eyes darting nervously to one another. The elder stepped forward, his brow furrowed in confusion.
The blacksmith?
He repeated slowly.
Sir, the blacksmith. He died 3 days ago. His funeral was the day you arrived.
The words hit Kenneth like a rifle's recoil, sending a shiver down his spine. He stared at the elder, searching his face for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, a cruel joke, but there was none. The murmurs of the villagers grew louder, filled with whispers of spirits and ghosts, their fear reawakening at the mention of the supernatural.
Are you certain?
Kenneth asked, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper.
Yes, sir.
The elder replied solemnly.
Was buried in the forest clearing by the old banyan tree. Perhaps his spirit was watching over you.
That night, Kenneth sat by the fire in the dim confines of the elder's hut, the flames casting flickering shadows on the mud-plastered walls. The warmth of the fire did little to dispel the cold knot in his chest. His rifle lay across his lap, his hands resting on its smooth wooden stock. Outside, the jungle murmured softly, its whispers quieter now, less menacing, but the questions in his mind were louder than ever. He stared into the flames, his thoughts spiraling back to every moment of the hunt, the dream that had unsettled him days ago, the one where a shadow had swallowed his own. The girl, her pale face trembling as she pointed at him, whispering.
The tiger has your shadow.
The footsteps outside his window that circled endlessly, leading nowhere. And finally the blacksmith, who had guided him at the most critical moment, only to vanish like mist in the morning sun. Would all these events be connected? Kenneth had always prided himself on his rational mind, on his ability to separate superstition from reality. But this time he wasn't so sure. There was no denying what he had seen, what he had felt. And the villagers' confirmation of the blacksmith's death left little room for doubt. He closed his eyes, trying to quiet his thoughts, but sleep eluded him. When he opened them again, he thought he saw movement in the corner of the room, just a flicker like a shadow that didn't belong. His heart quickened, his breath catching in his throat, but when he turned his head there was nothing there, just the fire crackling softly and the faint sounds of the jungle beyond the walls. Kenneth shook his head, brushing the sensation aside, but it lingered, a faint prickle at the back of his neck. The jungle, he realized, was not just a place of beasts and hunters. It was alive in ways he couldn't fully understand, its secrets woven into its shadows, its spirits entwined with its roots. Next morning, before leaving the village, Kenneth visited the clearing where the blacksmith had been buried. The villagers had marked the grave with a simple stone, inscribed with his name. Kenneth stood there for a long moment, his hat held against his chest, his rifle resting by his side. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. As he turned to leave, a sudden breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faint scent of iron and smoke. Kenneth paused, glancing back at the grave, half expecting to see the blacksmith standing there once more, his calm eyes watching over him. But the clearing was empty, the jungle still. Yet the breeze lingered, warm and steady, wrapping around him like a silent acknowledgement. As Kenneth made his way back to the world outside the jungle, he carried with him more than just the memory of the hunt. He carried the weight of unanswered questions, of mysteries he would never solve. The jungle had revealed its secrets to him in whispers, but it had also taken them back, leaving him with a sense of awe and humility. Some shadows, he realized, once cast, never truly left. Conclusion. Kenneth Anderson's encounter with the man-eater and the unexplainable shadows of the jungle remains etched in the fabric of his life, a tale that transcends the boundaries of courage and survival. It is not just a story of man versus beast, nor is it solely a battle between logic and the supernatural. It is a story of the human spirit, standing at the crossroads of the tangible and the mysterious, where fear, respect, and awe collide. The jungle, in all its haunting beauty and raw terror, is more than a place. It is a living, breathing entity, an eternal theatre where the paths of man and spirit intertwine. Here, life and death are not opposites, but partners in a delicate dance, their rhythms set by the whispers of the wind, the shadows of the trees, and the silent watch of unseen eyes. For Anderson, every step into the jungle was not just a hunt. It was a journey into a world where courage was tested, where humility was learned, and where mysteries lingered, unanswered. That encounter in Sigor was more than a chapter in Anderson's life. It was a lesson etched into his very soul. It taught him that the jungle, for all its dangers, was not an adversary, but a teacher. It taught him that not every question has an answer, and not every shadow is meant to be understood. And though he left the jungle behind, its spirit stayed with him, echoing in his memories like the roar of the tiger on that fateful night. As Kenneth Anderson closed the chapter on Sigor and its haunting man-eater, he carried with him the gratitude of a village, the memory of a blacksmith who defied death to guide him, and a respect for the forces that govern the wild, a respect that would follow him as eternal as the jungle itself. The end. And so, Kenneth Anderson's story becomes a part of the timeless lore of the jungle, a place where courage meets fear, where survival meets the supernatural, and where life and death are not opposites, but partners in an eternal dance. It is a reminder that the wild holds secrets far beyond our understanding, and that sometimes the greatest hunts are not for predators, but for the truths hidden in the shadows. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the untamed wilderness. At Storyteller Pro, We bring to life stories that capture the beauty, danger, and mystery of the human experience. Subscribe to our channel for more tales of adventure, survival, and the unknown.